let's talk about S4, The Lost Caverns of Tsojcanth by Gary Gygax, an adventure for character levels 6 to 10 for first edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. The summary on the front is this. It's a 1982 module, so actually quite late for Gary modules. In the Yatil Mountains, south of Perrinland, there is rumoured to be a magical hoard of unsurpassed value, a treasure of such fame that scores of adventurers have perished in search of it. Find the perilous Lost Caverns of Tsojcanth, and you may gain the hidden wealth of the long-dead Archmage, if you live. And then it's got a pretty cool, is it an Errol Otis cover? Who's the cover? Why do they put information in reasonable places on these books? Quite a good Bahir electrocuting some adventurers picture on the front, and there's an extra picture on the back of green slime and some other stuff. That's the colour complement for this. There are two booklets, so in format it's like S3i. There are two booklets, and there's a gatefold sort of thing with two dungeon maps and two versions of the wilderness map. One is a player's wilderness map in black, so you can photocopy it, and one is the DM's in blue. Revolutionary, this black ink stuff. So, and yeah, the two booklets are the actual adventure and then monsters and magical items, and possibly it's worth, because I think it can be summed up fairly quickly for our purposes, worth just quickly saying this is the monsters and magic items has a couple of bits, like there is a puzzle clue on the back if you want a black text photocopy to give to your players for a particular clue. There's monster roster again for you to use. The rest of it is rules content. It is a mini extra monster manual, including a bunch of demons and weird things. Marids and Dows turn up. Olive slime and slime creatures, Zagyar and Zegyi. There's some new potions, miscellaneous magic, and there are two artifacts and one special magic item. There's Daoud's Fabulous Lanthorn, the Necronomicon of Igwilv, which is actually a spellbook, not an artifact, and rules for the prisons of Zagig. And the monsters are basically, I think they pretty much all go in, do they not? Someone correct me, into Monster Manual 2, or at least many of them do. So this is essentially a soft release of an MM2 couple of years before the fact. The magical items, most of them, slippers of spider climbing, potion of vitality. And then there's a fairly short list of extra items, and they're not that exciting. The Wondrous Lanthorn is mostly each of the potential lenses it has. The 9 lenses, which have different gem prisms on, have spells they can cast with a cost in years, which is an interesting cost, isn't it? And a cost in age, but they can also be combined into different things by putting over different prisms, different lenses. The Demonomicon, sorry, not the Necronomicon. The Demonomicon is 3 clerical spells, 6 magic user spells, and there was the Prison of Zagig, and it's basically for summoning and binding demons. And it gives you some new spells to go with that, and the rules for the Prison of Zagig. And that's kind of useful. It's fringe, as in the exact spells you're using there are mostly pretty fringe. There is an interesting section. This is rules experimentation that doesn't go forward. One thing, like this booklet is kind of already an example of Gary experimenting with rules, and as are all his modules. But here he's actually saying, here's a ton of extra monsters, here's several extra magic items, here's an artifact, here are a bunch of new spells, but also rules for particular shapes of magical diagrams, pentacles, magic circles with different formats, with different powers against different creatures, reputed magical properties of gems. So there's things where you could basically, they are flavour extras, but they can have mechanical impacts. They can be true; those can be real things that work in the game, but they are almost feel like modular flavour add-ons to be like, okay, well, a bit like how some people make resurrection rituals more complex than casting a spell, that sort of thing. That's about all there is to say about this. Really, it's It's nothing too exciting if you have MM2 because that's half of it gone. The other half has some quite fun bits and some quite interesting rules experimentations that are not broadly taken up. There's not many people out there who run games with detailed magical circle rules. There's not many people out there who have lots of detailed demon summoning and binding stuff, which is the Demonomicon. There's not many people out there who have ever really used gems in that detail, though certainly the idea of different materials, different consumables being usable for different magic is something which has happened a little bit, and you're seeing that in Mamorpagas. Let's talk about the adventure. It's 32 pages. I think they are both 32-page modules. And it's interesting. It is, let's say the tournament module was just the dungeon. It then has a wilderness module added on at the start, and he makes this point. He says, "Oh, I've added a couple of extra potential characters you can use to help you in the wilderness section." So that's an interesting decision anyway that I haven't researched, don't know the psychology of. But the idea there's this dungeon, and then there's this above ground section to find Igwilf's hoard. So essentially, you have three sections. You have the overland section, you have the lesser caverns upstairs, basically, and the greater caverns downstairs. And that means there are different skills being tested here. And it is not the first wilderness trek. It's interesting. Why didn't you think about it? Maybe the first wilderness trek, then, meaningful wilderness trek, in Gary's hands at least, is in D1 and D2. I guess D1 to 3 in general. When you have those maps, you've got people going through. There is stuff in the world of Greyhawk Folio, which I think the first edition of that comes out before that. But it's not an adventure, it's just useful maps with usable stuff. And I guess you have some modules which literally are dumped on the overmap, Against the Cult of the Reptile God by Douglas Niles and Village of Homlet. Temple of Elemental Evil does have slightly more use of an overland map at a very, very minimal level, because there's nothing else on it. It's one, as I've discussed, one of the great failings of that module. But here you have an overland section which is moderately detailed, and then you have basically it is a module that is accomplishing or seeking to accomplish two things. One, it is the ultimate in Gary's oeuvre, ultimate monster zoo. You compare it to his other dungeons, and it has a far higher concentration of weird encounter, very near other weird encounter. It's room by room with a bunch of interactions. Often there's often interactions, in fact, between rooms. But it's high Gygaxian naturalism, which is not what would be the realistic hunting range for this, or why would these, I'll get to this, Balgura be here? But just, this is a cool thing. How would it make sense once it was here? And you get there's a bit of logic that, maybe Igwilf dumped half these things here. You get a bit of that in S1 Tomb of Horrors, of course, but in a very open way. All this weird stuff is like this because Acererak has put it there. And even there, it's not as pointed in terms of the Monster Zoo stuff as here. That is a trap dungeon. This is a monster dungeon, really. The other thing is, and this is a mention he gives in, I think when discussing, it's when discussing the Greater Caverns. In fact, let's just pop forward. I'll probably read a few bits of his advice, but the clues in the Greater Cavern. Caves and caverns are real tests of playing ability when the DM referees them properly. Even mapping and moving through them is a challenge. When confronted with the teleportation corridors in Area 19, players may become disheartened if they have not had considerable experience in similar situations, and the DM can place clues to help them with the teleportation corridors. He's earlier said, very much this is the thing requiring experience and ability. He says you should enliven the module with as much your own creativity as you wish. Talking about setting up nations, eventual characters. Players seeking the early death of their characters should be quite satisfied, this is to the DM, with the Lost Caverns of Tsojcanth, for there are many opportunities for the foolish or rash to end it all. Caution the players that this is a most difficult and perilous quest, one fraught with all manner of danger. To succeed, they must be prepared materially and mentally. This is meant to serve as a word of caution to the able player. Those without real knowledge of AD&D gameplay, without ability to handle characters at the appropriate level for the adventure, will see their characters perish swiftly if the module is handled correctly. And so I quote those two bits, one because it's a good insight into Gary's design and play philosophy. It's a reminder of why the special series is what it is. It's the specials, they're challenging modules. The same with, I've done all of Gary's modules in that series. This is the last of them, but I've also done Tomb of Horrors, I've reviewed that, and Expedition to the Barrier Peaks. They're oddities and challenges. So the second thing this is, one is it's him doing the Monster Zoo thing, ratcheting that up to 10 or 11 and really working out how he wants that to work. Rather than it being a... let's think of some other examples. Yeah, a trap dungeon like Tomb of Horrors, or a semi-military occupied dungeon like, to a large degree, the Gatehouse, or WG4, the Lost Temple of Tharizdun, which chronologically comes after this. There is actually an intentional link. That's a separate interesting thing that's happening, is the idea of modules which set up campaign environments rather than, and you get a bit of that with Homlet, of course, but then the T1 is on its own for many years, and then the temple itself, there's not very much campaign environment between those two places. Lost Caverns of Tsojcanth adds the wilderness area with a bunch of things to go around exploring and a potential home base, and then Lost Temple of Tharizdun does a similar thing coming off from that, where you start at the end of this module functionally in the gnome village in the area, and you have to go and find the Lost Temple, because that's another problem. And maybe you see an evolution of TSR and Gary's view on what product they should be selling. They should be selling basically more campaigns in a box, essentially. So, of course, these are quite high level for most people playing, even in the early 80s. You know, even most semi-serious players are going to take a little bit to get to level 8. You know, yeah, you've got the high college boom of everyone playing a couple of times a week, but you're going to take some time to get up to the average level here. But nonetheless, I mean, that's one thing, is you essentially have like 2 or 3 actually low-level modules by around 1980. It's actually a strange balance of modules at that time. So yeah, this is also a real test of, and this is a specific thing, dungeoneering. The assumption is that this is a challenge of complex environments for the players to explore, to map, to be good at, and it's so the skill. A difference is dungeoneering matters in terms of knowing how traps work in Tomb of Horrors, but really a lot of that is to do with slightly off the wall or very creative solution to strange traps that are sprung on you that you sometimes don't have much chance of spotting, and so one of the skills is also spotting them. Here, this is dungeons with heavily looping maps. There's virtually no looping in Tomb of Horrors. Here there's heavy looping, particularly on the Greater Caverns, which is where he mentions the mapping issue. So recognising that, I'll talk about a bit more of how successful it is. I mean, I think it's a very popular module. People like it a lot on the whole. It is, for me, slightly lower ranked amongst Gary's modules. I'm a big fan, but I think there are things that I jam with less, that I'm less excited about running. I think it is interesting how the wilderness section, let's start there, is... there are very simple wilderness rules, quite clear ones. What kind of trail or not you're on determines your speed, mounted or afoot. No weather rules, nothing else for that. No concern against general ground scale, which is something where both in the DMG, already published, and certainly in second edition too, the assumption that you have variable ground rates. It's the same not even in World of Greyhawk. There's some discussion about kind of like speed across different terrains and speed versus encounter likelihood, things like that. And there's a rule about food and hunting. You hunt for a day, and each person who hunts gets 2 days of food. So you get a day in profit, basically. Horses need to graze, and if they're off the trail, they have to spend every 3rd day grazing, otherwise they start losing hit points and eventually speed, and then they die. Very simple starvation rules, which are in some ways, given that starvation is something which is only ever properly addressed elsewhere outside of modules in the Wilderness Survival Guide by Kim Moen, I think that's the only place I know of officially that says, oh, this is how you deal with starvation. Water is dealt with separately in Dark Sun in second edition. It's interesting that there's just simple rules. This is what you do, and this is at some level because Gary's like, well, people need to run in a wilderness adventure. Rather than pointing them to all these rules or trying to make up detailed new rules, here's just a very simple set of rules to handle. People, they go around. They're sent by the Margrave of Bissell as the standard to go and find this place. There's a scrap of parchment, which is basically pointing you to the Yattles and to a mountain with a vellum map. You then have the wilderness overlap. This is the DM version in the blue with numbered encountered areas, and there's a random encounter. So there's numbered encounter areas, and there are variable encounters, which are dots. If you cross a dot, you roll. So there are no random encounters in the sense of move a hex, roll a die. There are marked encounters which you generate. Again, that's kind of the numbered ones are on the player's map too, which is interesting. Players know they're there. This is an interesting way of resolving the random encounter thing, and this is of course something people do. They say, well, I'm going to roll up all my random encounters beforehand, and when they get to that area, it will happen. And that's legitimate as an option. I quite like the sense of surprise, and I think it's part of my joy in running the game that just stuff is randomly happening. And so I kind of like the combination here in a way of there are set places. They are very, very steady. There's basically virtually always... Essentially, you can never get anywhere unless you're going overland off trail without crossing one. And going overland off trail is bad for food and bad for speed, so why would you do that? So I think there's an interesting thing there, that the assumption is there should be fairly regular, more or less evenly paced when I look at these dots. They're like 3-4 hexes away from each other in each direction. There should be fairly regular encounters, fairly equally paced, but you could, and this could be fun, still generate them randomly. And this is partly because there are fewer dots than there are encounters. I'm pretty certain there are 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 dots. There are 20 encounters. So there's border patrols. These could be Ketites or Perenlanders. Different features in your party might render those border patrols friendly. Avalanche, which is an actual falling rocks crush save versus spells to try to dodge. You get a 10 count to move back. Rock slide, static, but if you try to rush over it rather than take lots of time to do it, there might be lots of deaths. There's brown bears, there's gnoll raiding parties. Though one interesting thing throughout this is that he's very much opening up multiple ways to resolve each. The avalanche, you've got to count. If you back off in time, great. If not, you save. The rock slide, you can decide to take time or not. The brown bears, you could throw food to. The gnolls kind of just suck. Basically, there's a question of whether or not they surprise you, in which case they can lay an ambush or not. And there's morale rules for them, but they do just suck and they'll attack you. There's an eagle eyrie. Dwarf or high elf. The eagles will telepathically warn the party to stay away, otherwise they attack you, but they do also have clerical scrolls. So some of these are Fallout or other game faction triggers, I guess, rather than options. But they're modulation for varied parties, and I think that's not bad, is it? Mountain tribesmen, they're neutral, but they are they're actually feudal vassals of the gnomes you can become friends of, so... they don't want to help you though, but you can be friendly to them. They might help you with attacking, like the gnolls, for instance. There's goblins, who again can flee, but you can also, apparently, very importantly, they're carrying sheep carcasses, which they'll drop. Hill giants, who, on super powerful in this case, they're 8 + 1 to 2 HD, and they've got flat 2d8 attacks, so quite strong. But if you're level 8. If you've got a level 8-ish party, you should kill them. They can, however, just be overawed. And remember, it's always a risk. Do you want to risk fighting 3 of them? One of them just smashes the wizard off a lucky hit. There's a wolf pack in their den. They've got a bunch of stuff. there are wolf wares who rule them, which is the twist. There's a mountain dwarf band who are looking for hobgoblins, and they'll ignore you unless you're evil. But yeah, I guess you could try to become their friends. They don't want to listen to you if you say, come and do this with me. They want to go and find their enemy. There's a hermit who can give you rumours. It does actually say place this encounter where it's most useful to players. There's a troll cave. There's a wyvern roost. There's a hobgoblin war party. Really the dwarves. There is an ogre den and an elven water band. You can be friends with them. It's not clear there. They are giving advance warning of a humanoid raid. They're cautious, will question people. There's a blue dragon who you can bribe off or fight, and stone giants who kind of are causing a bit of chaos, but you can just become friends with. You could attack and kill, but you can become friends with, and they would help you. And they'll trade with you. They'll trade a scroll with Shocking Grasp and Bigby's Crushing Hand on it. So lots of interactive stuff. You're exploring around. Basically, you're not going to be bored doing this. There's some of that is interactive with itself and organic. So the dwarves are after the hobgoblins. The mountain tribesmen could be convinced to fight the hobgoblins, the goblins, or the gnolls, I suppose. Looking at that, I mean, the hobgoblin war party with 81 people, 81 members is pretty brutal compared to the raiders who are 32 gnolls and 70 goblins. Mountain tribe is only 20. Mountain dwarf band is 107, so they're pretty useful. The elven water band, it doesn't actually say at the top, it's like 70. You've got large, you can have mass combat there as well. I mean, there's options there. There are no kind of stunning locations in that of the variable encounters. There's no particularly exciting ones where you think this is so colourful, but there's a bunch of okay, fun ones. The lettered encountered areas are a gnome vale. You can go and become their friends. They can give you rumours and help, or you can attack and kill them. There is a map of their lair. They've got above ground places, but they retreat into that. It's not a particularly detailed lair, and you're mostly fighting the D2 WG4 style waves of humanoids, where you're fighting different groups in different places. Then you've got the craggy dells, which is where a bunch of hippogriffs are. And what are the other numbered areas? It's that you actually pick. Yeah, I think I'd forgotten that. Some of these areas are places where you put a particular encounter. You choose an encounter. So, yeah. There's also the star, which is your objective, the Lost Caverns, I think it is. Is that what the star is there? Or is it A and B? Yeah, A and B. Lettered encounters are the gnomes and the hippogriffs, and the star is the Lost Caverns. Yeah, if they are friendly, the gnomes will let you rest and help you. They've got a bunch of stuff they can help you with. They can point the Lost Caverns out to you. They can also reward you if you've done great things, and so I guess that's one way to tie in not just potentially the hippogriffs, the humans and orcs underneath the hippogriffs, and they're bothering the hippogriffs, but also the other humanoid tribes. So there is something where you could actually get a pretty lengthy section of campaign done just in the Atils, fighting humanoids and making allies and building stuff up. Probably what you want to do if you want that to be the emphasis is you want to have lots of plans for particularly the hobgoblins, but also the other raiders. And maybe you want some other... You want to put a wilderness adventure over theme onto it. You know, you want to have a mini dungeon somewhere with a particular evil leader or something. Or, as I say, the hobgoblins, bit of Red Hand of Doom style. There's a particular plan they have. The wilderness section is not very focused, but it's none of it is record breaking, but all of it is accomplished. And this is actually a theme for the rest of the dungeon. Well, the dungeon itself is, as a monster zoo, a Gygaxianly naturalistic monster zoo. There is little focus to sub-areas. There's little logic necessarily beyond the room itself, because it's just here's a cool room, here's a cool room. These interact in this specific way. By that I don't mean it's crazy incoherent. What I mean is there is no greater mind, as it were, tying it together beyond Igwilv, I guess. It is just a place, there's some stuff in it. It doesn't really make sense they live next to each other. Don't ask. I mean, to give some obvious examples of this, I'll just make sure I've got a map in front of me. There are often a corridor, a couple of rooms between areas, but nonetheless, the fact that and certainly the way there are assumptions about the way in which those close to each other interact. But you come in, there is a place with loads of statues, the entry caverns. Next to the entry caverns, pretty much there are a bunch of sturges. That's in number 2. In number 5, there's a littered cave with a lurker above. In number 6, there's a grotto with some pesh who are trying to mine up into a valuable cavern. What is it that there's treasure, or is it that there's minerals? I think it's that there's minerals. They're basically building a shaft, and they they don't want you to use light. They are willing to be your friends. They'll even help you against the clay golem. He was at 4. He, to be fair, is well back. 3 there is a berserk clay golem, no, is at 3. 4 is Mobats. So there are rooms between, but more or less it's you go in and you just go to different rooms and fight stuff, or negotiate with stuff, or come up with tricks to deal with stuff. And this isn't a criticism of those encounters. In fact, I think they're pretty good. It's rather a factual description of what happens in a monster zoo. Is that, and you see this, you can see this influence coming into some very fun modern modules. Actually, though they're not advanced Dungeons and Dragons, I'd say Gavin Norman's Beneath, what's the oak tree, and the caverns one, they're connected. They are, it feels to me like, at least subliminally, Gavin can disagree, influenced by this style of adventure, which you also see in some basic modules. You know, the Caves of Chaos is an obvious example too. The Caves of Chaos, to be fair, it is a Gygax module, B2, has a particular pseudo-logic to its monster zoo. These are different settlements very close to each other because that's the space they've got. And I guess you could apply the same here, but really it's that each of these is an encounter he's come up with, or a group of them. These 3 over here, 7, 8 and 9, they interact. And, you know, they're what you're here to do. A bit of the classic, we're playing D&D tonight, so there's a thing you're going to go and do. Please have fun, stop complaining. But yeah, in 7 you've got a fun thing. You've got cave crickets, they make a lot of noise. If they make a lot of noise, then the trolls from 9 come in. You also have 6 green slime blobs up there. There's the remains of an elf with braces of defense AC 5 and a gold necklace with a gem. And indeed a bag of gems. Treasure is reasonably generous, especially for average level 8, I would say. And that's partly because there is a reasonable standard of, like, surprisingly, I mean, for 4 trolls, even at level 8, well, levels, say, average level 8, those guys can do a lot of damage. You're talking about things with 3 attacks. They have regenerate 3 around, 3 rounds after taking damage, albeit. But you're talking, they're starting at 36, unless you that's the toughest one. If you're unless you're piling damage onto one at a time, and or using solutions to their regenerate, you're likely to take some damage, or you may even lose someone, or at least take someone unconscious. So they have 1d4 times 20 of each type of coin. That includes platinum, of course, so it's at least 200 gold from that. 1 to 4 gems, presumably randomised, 1 piece of jewellery, 1 potion of healing, 1 potion of vitality, a quiver with 9 arrows, 3 broken, 2 normal, 4 plus 1. That's a decent, that's actually not even the best example of this, but there's something decent there. The 6 slimes, braces of defence, a gold necklace with a gem worth 600, and 13 gems, base 50. That's a pretty good thing. And that is, to be fair, a very dangerous encounter as well. 6 slime monsters, 6 not monsters, slime blobs. So 6 potential eating you alive drops at equivalent of being 4 HD due to the space, it says. And they interact with the cave cricket, the trolls do. The Pesh can be allied with, and you can go and fight the clay golem with them. One of the daggers on the floor of the cave is +2 Longtooth, which is particularly good for gnomes and halflings. Cave morays, Fomorian giants. A strong magical boat, shrinking, expanding boat. A underground lake with a snapping turtle in it. Then there's separately to the land stuff, because you're then going to be using the boat to get around between these different areas. You know, you can see you've got to you could, some of it is quite quick. This is pushing down that way, so you're going to have to do something to get there. The landing ground for 13, the ledge shelving, that's 12. Where's 13? 13 there. Yeah, resting on the shelf of stone. So basically, you got to get someone to swim over there or whatever it is, I guess. And then you can row around, well, magically order around. There is a way to die by being swept down the main current. You can go into a side channel. The lake itself has a giant snapping turtle in it. The side channels have 19, 20, and 22. There's a small lake which is just a magic mouth mocking you with 3,000 GP of individual gems there. Black water with Lacodon ghasts, which are pretty unpleasant. And yeah, so those are the main things you can go on the water. Oh, on the pool cavern 22, there's a Marid. You can dispel magic to free him. He will then give you specific kinds of help. And/or there is, where is the Dow that you... Yeah, the Dow is in the richly furnished cave. 18 here. So you got another interaction there. You go here, you free the good guy, kind of, and he won't directly help you, but he will give you lots of help to defeat the Dow. For instance, if you defeat the Dow, he'll give you an alter reality. You can bribe him, and he's 75% likely to give them water breathing abilities. He'll also escort them to any location along the underground waterways to go and do something else. So, yeah, for one day. So you can make a friend there. He won't help you fight the Dow, but if you do destroy his Dow enemy, then he rewards you greatly. Yeah. It's kind of dumb in one way. There's just a Dow hanging out in a room. He's under changed self in order to dupe the party. Why is he trying to do... in fact, for Dow. Why are they trying to dupe the party? Well, I guess because it's fun. They create a corridor and garden. And there is a midget. There is a long bit of box text on this particular one. The antechamber of the garden of 1,000 earthly delights. Like, it's silly. It's a memorable encounter, and that's what each of these is meant to be. And there are puzzle elements, so the Marid helping you round the water and rewarding you if you free it, so that requires Dispel Magic, but also if you defeat the Dow. These are meant to kind of pile up and click together. It's not Kunzi and Hidden Depths. They're not like 2 levels apart with a weird key that goes into a thing. But there's an element of that kind of clicking together of things to be like, okay, I think it's the command word possibly for the boat is on the level below, to be fair. But they are meant to be just individually interesting encounters. Sometimes with a bit of box text to help it along. Sometimes, you know, it's just meant to be funny. The magic mouth saying, "You're in a dead end. Flee back to the south and take the way the water enters, or stay here and die," etc. etc. Do we actually have a full-on reference for A? So yeah, basically you've got A here, which I can't actually see as being properly mentioned. B, the main outlet, is pointing you this way. C, there is the Western Bridge, which is basically your last chance. And then D, either you have to give them an underwater map, underground, underwater, like river map, or you need to just count them as dead. If you find there's a particular staircase, there's only one way down. Here, up at 16, the boulder heap, which has the graven glyphs on it, is in the Rainbow Cavern, which is where there are the Gorgimas. Are there multiple? the Gorgamera Chosos, who is likely to be mistaken for a chimera. Lion, dragon, gorgon heads, chimera. It's far more intelligent than most Gorgameri. So basically, it's just a very unpleasant monster, and there's not really a way out of combat. That is something where it'll try to dupe you, basically, so it can eat you, I guess. It has, to be fair, pretty good treasure again, 9,000 GP, 800 PP, 7,000 silver, 2 pieces of jewellery, 21 gems, potion of green dragon control, scroll of protection from elementals, useful for the Tao, a bag of holding, a horn of fog. So yeah, the risk reward is good and fair, and it's heavily social because several of the bad guys, like in that case, some are just green slime and suck, but some will try to trick you. Some you may be able to overawe, as in previous examples, or get help to fight in some way. But if you clear the boulders, you go downstairs and you get a much more complex map. This one, especially if you're not bothering too much about trying to get them to sub-map some of the labyrinthine stuff, you could do, but you know, that's something where certainly that is a style of play that is assumed to be possible and desirable here. But yeah, some of this is a bit more complicated, but most of this isn't that bad. This is bad if you're not willing to either draw the map out, black sheet it, create fog of war, or you've disciplined your players to learn mapping and learn it well in some way, and to have just the degree of wiggle needed for that, which sometimes comes up, I find, where you say, they're like, oh, there's a bunch of corridors here, that's what I got drawn. How long, you know, in that case, just say, it takes you 1 extra turn to get out, rather than, hey, you're lost. You know, make them roll the extra encounter check. If it's just a little wodge of 3 corridors next to each other, it's probably fine. You're not really punishing them. You're not really letting them off easy. But yes, the greater caverns are basically more of the same. They are harder, tougher stuff. There's a tribe of troglodytes, 18 of them. This is not a above ground thing where you can get allies or you can avoid it entirely. This is a thing where if you want to go through their area, you're going to be fighting a bunch of troglodytes. This is one route here. You can see you come in here, and then this northern route is via their lair. They are right next to a cavern of corpses inhabited by a Bodak, who's on good terms with the troglodytes. The leader sees it as an ally and a demigod. Gygaxian naturalism. They live, I mean, a square is 10 feet. They live 40 feet from each other. There's just this horrendous, creature who is calcifying corpses, and it's decorating it, and that's kind of a cool encounter too. You know, it has it pretends to be one of the corpses. It ambushes you. It is a gaze that say versus death or die. Special defenses. It's immune to stuff. Very powerful enemy. HD 9+9. The particular HP on this is 54, but the ton of stuff we're talking about. Over 10,000, probably much more, relatively speaking, in common treasure, plus several potions, clerical scroll of 4 scrolls, magic user of 6 scrolls, scroll of protection from possession, ring of warmth, braces of defense, candle of invocation, serpentine owl, short sword, +1, elf-sized scale mail +2, and spear +2. Ton of stuff. High risk reward. There is a kind of, as I say, that's something where when you're thinking about, do I like this module, or my players, that's a good example of are they going to enjoy that slightly more, something that now we mostly see come out in more basic leaning OSR modules, these sort of weird, wonderful mishmashes of stuff where there's kind of a logic to them. Gygaxian naturalism, not high naturalism. High Gygaxian, not high. And, you know, are they going to enjoy that? I think that's a good example. Margors, there's a bay here called Luth. He's a smart fellow, we are told. Direct powerful monsters to the vast treasure to the west, which is where the Margors go, if it considers it's going to lose. There is an Umber Hulk. There are gas spores, a subterranean lizard who can climb on the ceiling. Is both hungry for flesh and angry because its mate was slain. That's maybe a less exciting one, but it's a good example of more of the same. There are 4 Bargora demons who are just hanging out, apparently. There's a glowing grotto, which is the teleportation area, and then this is actually the core puzzle. There's not really any puzzles, generally speaking, in this. It's lots of monster interactions or monster fights. And sometimes it's a find a solution to the monster fight or interaction by going somewhere else for another monster. It's a highly social adventure in that way. Monster zoos are... Maze the Blue Medusa is, I guess, an example of this, I think people would say. Monster zoos are not... they're not actually well suited for proper slash 'em, hack 'em, fight your whole way through adventures because, one, they're super deadly. Loads of that stuff is very deadly. You need allies. You need to have found stuff. But 2, because there's so much of it, you're just going one room to the next. It'd be boring, potentially, unless you've got a party who really loves combat and you run it in the right way for them. But also because it, well, I've already kind of adverted to it, it becomes so much more challenging, and there are other ways through. But the teleportation ring in the centre, down here, is the one puzzle. There is a clue you can give your players, or a set of clues. They get transported. There are a variety of places they can get transported, basically, and they have to work out... teleportation is random, and you use a d4 to work out where they're going. And if you return, you get beyond the teleportation area, basically. You get to area 9, and you've sort of avoided the... Say that, no, glowing grotto, that is not the teleportation grotto. Where's 9? Let me correctly tell you where that is. 7, 8, 9. So basically, yes, there's a thing you can go in there and you've got to solve the puzzle of that place. You could argue, of course, in that case, it's not much of a puzzle. The puzzle is avoid it. But there are interesting possibilities. You can go into a labyrinth and find some minotaurs. They also have treasure. There's a place with armoured automatons. They are less positive. There's a hall of pentacles, which you have to solve using the right pentacles to get back out. The Canyon of Centaurs is comfortably the most interesting one of those. Is basically you go to a Greek mythology world. There's centaurs who can help you. If you get a horseshoe from one of them, you can be teleported back. That's it. Basically, if you don't discover the secret, you're stuck there. Actually, I think there's a pretty reasonable argument there that a DM could, if you see this as a campaign dungeon for the mid-campaign. They've done some stuff at lower levels. They're level 6 to 8, and they want to go average 8, but I mean, usually you look at the lower end with some higher end characters. You go there, and they're doing all kinds of stuff. They do the overland, they set up all these alliances, they go to the extra dungeon you've added. I think in this case, having it as an option that you just have a thing the centaurs want, and that's kind of implied you need to become their friends, and that thing that they want is actually going and dealing in this Greek mythology land that feels quite different to the Greyhawk you're playing in. Plenty more stuff as we go on, with plenty more treasure. 2 jars of Kotum's ointment. Large cavern of rotting fungi, that's shambling mounds. A large irregular cavern, this is a semi-famous one, isn't it, for some people. There's a rhinoceros beetle and a particularly tough hill giant. The beetle guards him. He has, surprisingly, I mean, his HD is still technically only 8 plus 2, HP 57. There's particular rules. The shambling mounds nearby won't attack the giant. The beetle would devour them. So there's an interaction to explain the monster zoo. If intruders come, the beetle attacks. He scoops up a boulder and attacks you. He doesn't have enormous amounts of treasure. 1276 GP, ivory necklace of 500 GP weight with 200 GP value, and a belt from a giant weasel pelt, which is 875 GP. That's actually, it's a Gygaxian trick as well, the low value encounter. You don't really need to go there or want to go there. It is less common in this module than in some. Shriekers, Dracolisk, these guys just all hanging out. I mean, how close? I feel like the dragon and the the Dracolisk and the Hill Giant aren't far from each other, really, are they? To be fair, so there's the uh, the Hill Giant in one corner, the Dracolisk in the other. They make sure never to go too close to each other, I guess. Grotto of the Demon Idol, which is a stone golem with special rules and a magic mouse and an illusory treasure. That's quite Tomb of Horrorsy. Great Iron Doors, the Corridor of Red Marble, which is again, there's a bunch of magic protections, and then you're trying to get the inner doors. This is what I was getting wrong before. The inner doors are not particularly, all told, they're not as puzzly as some things. They open outward, but you have to pull them really hard. They then have slightly odd and unpleasant corridors going down from them, and there are anti-divination. Then we get to Maiden sleeping. Of course, she's a vampire. Fighter/vampire, that famous other class vampire. AC -3, magic armor, 4 due to dexterity. Weapon, she's got damage by weapon of 1d64. I think that might be 1d6 plus 4. There are a couple of typos like that. Level 13 fighter with vampiric abilities. This is Drelnza, again a fairly famous encounter in this module. Igwil's daughter, and she she wants to charm them into helping her. She has a chaotic evil bastard sword +4. There's a bunch of pretty nasty things she can do. Ultimately, basically a big thing is a lawful good cleric will screw her over in terms of her cover, because the sword will spring into her hands. She will smite the cleric. So as long as you haven't all been charmed before you come into the lower portion, you're going to get into a pretty straight fight, and hopefully you have the weaponry and tools to do this. Here's a relevant thing in terms of when we say combat is war in Gygax in 1st edition, but the hyper one hyper OSR mentality can be, therefore combat is basically to be avoided unless you're just ambushing like 5 chumps. There's 20 of you, you're all hidden. Sometimes you've got to fight in AD&D, and that can be dicey in the literal and figurative sense. You have to take risks. You've got to take calculated risks. You make sure you've lined your ducks up, but the point is it's got to happen sometimes, and there's something, in a sense, ultimately wonderfully Conan about that, or Fafnir and the Grey Mouser, ultimately quite cathartic, where all your planning, you've done a bunch of good stuff, you've planned in this way, you dealt with this encounter that way, you avoided this encounter, but eventually you got to pay the piper, you got to do your best. Here, once you clock this is the bad guy, you're not rescuing someone in the middle, you are being attacked by the final guardian of the tomb. At that point, it's all crazy, and that's great. I think that is a good advanced Dungeons and Dragons feel, which does feel different to when you're doing similar things in 3rd, 4th, 5th edition games. I would say strongly different. The risk quotient, if nothing else, is so much higher. It's episode 7 or so of the Spelljammer stream I did. The breakdown in combat there, where the party plans well, does some good stuff, but eventually it just comes down to who holds their nerve, who comes up with the best solutions while everything is going wrong. Then anyway, you defeat her, hopefully. She can go gaseous and try to run, which is fine. There are a few things, as in she can escape. You might lose the XP. There's loads of stuff in there. You've got ever-burning incense that can be sold for 1,000 GP. Inlaid stands, 2,000 GP each. A crystal bowl, 3,250 GP. There's plenty of size on this, if not weight, so you know that you've got to work out the travelling back out. Part of the skill of dungeoneering, of mapping and everything else leads to the logistics of getting back out. Again, just an authentic part of that game style. Tiara worth 27,000. Inside the cage there are these nice things, but the cage is a prison of Zagig, and so you get a Zegyi that pops out, and that's bad. If you get the Demonomicon and then you break the seal, a Zag-Yar comes out. That's kind of bad. It's a positive plane creature. The big gimmick of these is, other than being quite tough and difficult and complex, is that if they make contact, they make a massive explosion. It's it's a sort of matter antimatter meeting. That's fine. That's the end of the module. It is not, in that sense. Drelnza is a fun, interesting encounter because of the how quickly do you realise you just got to kill her. The Magyar Zegi thing, I mean, like I say, they are tough. They've got energy blasts. They do a bunch of damage. They've got psionics. They've got some MR. They are basically just quite complex creatures. One way, and this is something which is not very different to later editions, Gary partly makes some higher level, tough enemy creatures, tough to kill. Sometimes it's that one solution he has for mid-level parties, even higher level parties, is there's lots of enemies. That is a solution, WG4, which follows this, has that as its central conceit for the first major encounter in the dungeon. But another option is you just have stuff that has a suite of abilities that's annoying. Some of it is puzzle-like. Ooh, it's immune to this. But some of it, like MR, is just annoying. And it's meant to be. I think that's maybe a criticism of MR. I use and like it, but you can see it being a criticism that you're like, well, I just have a 3 in 20% chance. If I roll 18, 19, 20, I cancel your spell, more or less. That's tough, that's challenging, but it's something where it should be teaching the players to have lots of options, basically. MR is one way of stopping players bypassing magical protections on creatures, basically. Special defences, I really mean. Which is one thing. You look at a creature who needs +2 to hit, and you think, well, we've only got 2 players who have that, 2 characters. I guess if everyone else just uses magic where they can, or helps other characters, that would be good. Well, MR creates a second barrier against that, and that's one way of creating a challenge which requires you to be well equipped and to use the right spells. Do you know what MR doesn't protect against? Though, technically, other things might. But, if you're trying to stop something getting after you, MR does not stop you caving in something with a spell. They can't get through in a hypothetical case because of that. The special defense is +1 or better, to be fair, for the Magyar, which isn't actually that bad, is it? You're kind of being pointed elsewhere to set booklet 2 to learn about their spell immunities. But yeah, they're not super tough creatures, but it's just a special thing where you're like, here's some weird matter antimatter creatures. And then it ends, and you can take Dowd's Wondrous Lanthorn, or Fabulous Lanthorn, or whatever it is. You can take the Demonomicon. You can take the Prison of Zagig and use it for your own purposes. The afterword, it does say you could let people skip training if they've played well. Don't worry if they haven't, because the assumption is you might well have got to they might well have leveled up experience points wise. It does have a final Gygaxian attitude thing. Allowing foolish and ignorant players to advance their characters to high level reflects badly upon the game, even more so upon the dungeon master who allows such a travesty to occur. This is a playstyle. I think it leads to. There are things I think that are irreplicable. I think when you realise what he means is you should literally use the charts in the DMG to rate people's performance. Which isn't a great entry in that book. I think that's interesting. It's interesting to think that he thinks this is high level. It's testing all your skills. It's got extra rules about wilderness stuff, so you can plan well. You've got all kinds of interactions with these tribes above ground. You go below ground. You have to map well. You have to know the puzzle solutions. You have to be prepared for particular kinds of fights. For instance, the trolls or Drelnza are good examples of that. Yeah, there's a lot going on in that as a high level challenge, and that's, as I say, very near the end of his active publishing career as a D&D module writer rather than Legendary Journeys, I guess, which is where after this is WG4, there's Isle of the Ape, is that WG8 maybe? X1 and 2 may have already come out by this point, and you've got T1 to 4, which is 1984 I think, is it? Someone correct me. So you've got very little left after this as a D&D writer, and though I think the Monsters U thing itself is not a wholly appealing model for the high granularity, high world intensity feel that AD&D I think specialises in. It is an exceptionally good realisation of that concept in terms of things interacting, things having an internal logic, and I think as a dungeon challenge it is, whilst not exciting, there's not actually, apart from the river, there's not loads of crazy terrain. There are plenty of things, if you just want to test that as a skill, to do that with. It is not necessarily the best dungeon crawl for those purposes ever. And I like the Wilderness Crawl, I think it's an interesting addition. I think this is a very good module. I don't think it is, and I think it's a great module, in fact. To be clear, I don't think this is in his top couple. I think there are other modules which do elements of it certainly better. I think there are better Wilderness modules. I think there are better dungeon modules. I think in terms of modules that are trying to test high-level dungeoneering, there are fairly few, and by high-level I don't mean in-game, I mean high-skill dungeoneering. There are fairly few that really push people to the degree that this will, without being a straight-up puzzle gimmick dungeon like Tomb of Horrors. I think WG4 has a bit of it, as does its cousin D2. Both of those, of course, and those are D2, WG4 also have Wilderness sections, so there is further parallel there. I don't know what other AD&D straight-up dungeons I think really closely compare beyond a couple of those. Maybe that's something you can put in the comments if you think about your favourite AD&D dungeon adventures, because yeah, I think there are aspects, to be fair, say, of the functionally incomplete Undermountain, Ruins of Undermountain, where you can see a similar sort of like, you've got to think about this stuff a lot. The difference there is that is released as an outline. I'll review that one day. It's an interesting module. But yeah, so is it the best dungeon adventure ever? Probably not literally the best ever. Is it the best combination wilderness and dungeon adventure ever? Probably not literally. Is it the best wilderness? Probably not literally. But it ranks so high in all those areas, and it is such a, it is bordering on the apotheosis of the Gygaxian style that it's necessary reading if you're interested in how to craft adventures and how D&D is developed. But also there's so much fun in there, so many interesting encounters that I think it's runnable and certainly also stealable. Just grab stuff out of it and put it elsewhere if you want. Anyway, tell me what you think of it in the comments. As I say, put your other favourite dungeon adventures, comment on monster zoos, everything like that, and I will see you next time.